Hello everyone. Today's poem is 鹿寨 by Wang Wei. It's a long break since my last video posted because I went to this very place, the exact place of this poem, to have a better understanding of this poem. 鹿寨 was considered to be the few most important poems by Wang Wei. Actually, so one of the 20 poems written by Wang Wei for a painting in a temple's wall in the place of Wangchuan. So I went to this place, Wangchuan. It's a place name. So basically, it's a valley go into the South Mountains, a huge long South Mountain in the south of Xi'an City, or in the south of Chang'an City in the Tang Dynasty, roughly less than 1 hour's drive from Xi'an City today. And you go into the narrow valley a few kilometers, and then you find a sort of the small basin. That place is so-called Wangchuan. Today, it's just a basin with a very, very small river in the middle flowing outside of the valley. But in the time of Tang Dynasty, from a lot of the poems by Wang Wei and other people, we know the basin could be a huge lake, or the major area of this basin is occupied by this huge lake. And this is the place of Wangchuan. Wangchuan, Wang means this place actually simulates the figure of a car wheel. The creeks from the mountains surrounded this basin. They flow down like the wheel spoke, and in the center, the huge lake is the axle of the wheel. So that's why this place was so called Wangchuan. Wang Wei bought this place in his late life to have a place to lead a hermit life in the South Mountain. And this place used to be a villa belonged to a poet in the early Tang period. His name is Song Zhiwen, so it's a sort of the quite famous place, even starting from the early Tang period. And Wang Wei spent a lot of time to rebuild, to restore this place to its best status. Wang Wei drew a very famous painting on the wall of a temple in this valley, and to describe, to depict all the most famous or most beautiful whale spots, 20 whale spots, and also with the painting, he write 20 poems for each of the whale spots, and this one is one of the 20 poems. Today, there is nothing left in this place. No lake, no temple, no whale spots, but there's still one very big ginkgo tree. It was told this ginkgo tree was planted by Wang Wei himself, and this ginkgo tree is precisely located at the east gate of that temple. So you know the exact place of that temple. What made me so sad is that The tomb of Wang Wei and his mother still exists in this place 50 years ago, and it was demolished because a new factory was built there. So if you come here, the only thing left is the mountains and this ginkgo tree. Now let's look at this very famous poem by Wang Wei. 鹿寨，王维。空山不见人，但闻人语响。返景入深林，复照青苔上。A very simple and straightforward, but it was considered to be the best breed poems by Wang Wei. 鹿寨, though here it doesn't spelling as the normal sounding 柴. Here is you should spell it as 鹿寨, 知哀寨, 鹿寨. That means the fence to prevent the deers coming into. So he basically he built a big garden. He don't want the animal, the deers, the wild boar, the bears, so any animals that could coming into this beautiful garden. 空山不见人, so in the empty mountains there's nobody can be seen. So 空 is a very frequent word used by Wang Wei because he was a true Buddhism, and the very fundamental philosophy of the Buddhism is the things you think it is actually is empty. But if you think somewhere is purely empty, but it's everything. So that's a very famous Buddhism sentences. 空即是色，色即是空. This type of Buddhist words or Zen words appears very frequently in Wang Wei's poem. So if it's first time to read poem of Wang Wei, it's really different, it's unique. But if you read a lot of poems by Wang Wei, it's quite normal sentences. In the empty mountain, there's nobody. 但闻人语响, but you can hear the humans' sounds. 但闻人语响. So that's sort of the reality of the Zen, because you think it's empty at the moment. The mountain is all empty, but actually you feel the voices of a human being. And on the other hand, the voices of the human being actually make the empty mountain, the feeling is more empty or more silent, because if there's not a sound at all, it's hard for you to feel the real silence, because that's without contrast. You never feel the real characteristics of a thing. So the contrast for the emptiness is noise, is something creature. You can see the creatures, you hear the creatures, you find some of the dynamic things, or find some of the real things. So that's all by the contrast. This is Zen, 空即是色，色即是空. So that's the philosophy in Wang Wei's mind, as always, and appears in his poems again and again. 返景入深林. 景 here refers to the sunlight. 返景 means Fan means the sun is going back to its home, it's going to sleep. What does it mean? It means the sun is going down to and go to the dark sides. That means the people will get to sleep in the night. And also the sun does the same thing. The sun will get to sleep in the dark time. So he's going back to his own home. So that means fan. So the dropping sun above the horizon, it's warm, but it's quite weak. So that's something quite subtle. And this a little warm, a little weak sunlight get into the deep forest. So that means in the deep forest, normally it's quite dark, but you still can see some of the warm but weak sunlight because the sun is dropping. So everything is in a very, very extreme and very subtle situation in this poem. 复照青苔上, and here it's just like a close look. The sunlight shines on the green moss. That's a very, very precise description because the forest is very, very thick and deep. So in the noontime, the sunlight cannot go through of the trees and shines on the green moss on the ground. But when the sun goes down, the sunlight almost shines horizontally. It can shines on the green moss again, because in the morning it also shines on the green moss, and so you feel a little bit of the time changing, because full, it means again the sunlight shines on the green moss again. So you feel so everything is so delicate and subtle, but every word, every character is so simple. Primary school students know every word in this poem. Anyhow, different person can have different interpretations on this poem. A Buddhist will take this poem in one direction, and people like the forest, like the mountains, could have another feeling and compare his tracks during the day. For a person like me who has been to this real site, even it's so different from Wang Wei's time, but the mountain is still there. And when you look around, you try to figure out how the name of this place come from, the well, the spoke, and there's so many small creeks coming down from the mountains and rush to the huge lake at the basin, in the basin. You just imagine so many imagination you can have, especially when you went further into the valley and get to the big ancient ginkgo trees, which was supposed to be planted by Wang Wei himself, and try to identify the place, the exact locations where Wang Wei and his mother was buried near the ginkgo trees. 1,300 years has passed. Everything changed, but this poem and the philosophy and the scenario, the picture ski scenario is still in the mind who read this poem. And fortunately, the painting in the temple's walls was copied by so many people in the later dynasties. It's such a famous painting. So almost all the painters in the later years, they always like to paint this painting to simulate the techniques and the content of this picture. And we still can feel something from those copies. From the painting, even it's a copied painting, you still can find basically what the whale spot looks like, 鹿寨. And from my own experience, the 20 poems, each titled with a name. The name is not a location name because Wangchuan is not a big place. The small basin, the diameter of the small basin is roughly 1.5 kilometers. So it cannot contain so many places or name of places. So the 20 names is the name for the whale spots, not like the later people or today's people. Most people think that 20 names refers to 20 different places. Actually, it's not, because they are all within a big garden bought by Wang Wei. My feeling, especially after my visiting to this real place, is this poem could be very simple, even it contains some philosophy of the Buddhism, but it's still a very simple poem, mainly to serve to describe the scenic spot, the view spots on the painting, because this poem is right on the very original painting. It served the purpose to put more feelings or more angles on that painting by the poem. And also, the painting, on the other hand, will give these poems more aspects, more feelings, and more angles. The painting is static picture, but every sentence in this poem is dynamic. The first sentence, 不见人, you don't see a person, so you see, that's dynamic, that's action. 但闻人语响, when you hear, that's also another action. It's dynamic, and also it's associated with the sound. The sound can never reflect it on a painting. 返景入深林, 返, so you go back and you get into, 入深林, get into, that's all dynamic. And the last sentence, 照, shines on the green moss, that's dynamic, and you feel the warmth as well. So that's the painting, and the poems interact with each other and enrich each other. At the very end, when you read this poem second time, the third time, the dynamic sentence, it turns like to a deep silence, or a sort of the silence eternally. That's the wonderful writing techniques of Wang Wei. So, can you feel that? This poem is a very, very good comparison poem to Wang Wei's poem. Pei Di, the poet of this poem, is a very very good friend of Wang Wei. They both wrote 20 poems for that famous painting with the same title. Thus, we have this same title poem by Pei Lu Zhai. I won't go through to the sentences, but you can see this poem actually describe a very static picture of that whale spots, and it point out the mountain is cold and I'm the lonely guest, and the forest is so deep and there's no trees. There's some trees of the deers, so that's the titles refers to, and everything is just describing and static. And then with this poem in our mind, and then let's look back to the poems by Wang Wei, Lu Zhai, and you can see the Wang Wei actually didn't depict the picture at all. He picked some of the very, very subtle pieces of the pictures and his feelings, and also the 4 sentences is dynamic. It makes you feel the time changing, and you feel the sound. It's all dynamic. Anyhow, after you reading the poem of Wang Wei, the feeling left in your mind is huge silence, eternal silence. So with comparison, you will know what the wonderful technique was applied by Wang Wei. Okay, that's for today, and bye-bye.